Welcome class to Chapter 7 on Memory. Good deal of information is taken from this book, Moonwalking with Einstein. There's a link right here that by Joshua Thor that is an interview with him or a presentation with him. And he talks about some of the techniques that he uses that enabled him to win the U.S. Memory Championship. Get to basic, happens every year. You win a bunch of money by doing a bunch of memory tasks, doing well on them, and beating everyone else that does really well on them. One task, for example, is they shuffle a deck of, I think, 6 cards, and then you got like 5 minutes to memorize them in order, and you get points for the ones that you memorize in order. And so there's different memory techniques that they use that the ancients also used to be able to memorize different things. Memory in the nervous system's capacity to acquire and retain skills and knowledge for later retrieval. 3 concepts: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding is the processing information and putting it into an appropriate neural code so that it can be stored. Storage, the retention of encoded information and representations over time. And retrieval, the act of recalling or remembering stored information when it's needed. And really a lot of emphasis of this lecture is going to be talking about how you encode is really going to influence how you retrieve information. And also how often you retrieve and how you retrieve is going to influence that too. And that's the idea of studying and how you put information in, the use of working memory and different techniques that you can use is going to influence your ability to recall it later. And there's another slide on that saying those 3 concepts. So at the beginning, before you can really memorize something, you have to attend to it. Attention, focusing mental resources on information, allows further processing for perception, memory, and response. We fail to learn information that we do not pay attention to. Do you pay attention there? Rewind? Okay, you got it. Our visual attention is limited. Generally, our attention is limited. Our visual attention is limited. Trying to find an object with 2 features is harder than 1. Find the woman in the red coat. Obviously easier in this picture than it is here. Auditory attention is also limited, but the idea is that your unconscious mind is really registering information when it is relevant. So even though you might be focusing in on one thing like the lecture, if someone says your name or something in the background is loud, or it's maybe something related to survival or something like that, you're picking it up in your unconscious, and all of a sudden you're going to hone in on it. So that's kind of strange, when you think about it. You're listening to, you're at a party, they call it the cocktail phenomena, right? Cocktail party phenomena. And you are listening to someone really intently, their conversation, and all of a sudden someone says your name and you hear it. I mean, really? You didn't hear it, quote unquote, right, when they're saying other words and stuff, but when they say your name, you hear it. So that means that your unconscious mind is really tracking it the whole time. Filter theory. Filter theory attempts to explain how we selectively attend to the most important information. Attention is really like a filter, and we let in what is important. For example, survival-related information. Stimuli that evokes emotions such as faces, especially threatening ones, we're going to pay attention to that more so, and that's the idea there, right? Our attention is very limited, and so obviously we're going to pay attention to the things that relate to survival and then other things later. Our attention is limited, and they gave the idea of change blindness. I find this very odd. Maybe it's just we really don't pay attention to things or the people that we talk to. But the idea is a participant is approached by a stranger, quote unquote, that's actually working for you, right, as the researcher, and asks for directions. And then they bring people that they're working for the researcher, bring looks like a door that blocks the view. And then they switch spots, and it's someone that kind of looks like the person at first, but is different. And a lot of people, half the participants giving directions, never noticed that they were talking to a different person. I said a lot, didn't I? Half. It's half a lot. It's right in between a lot. Conclusion: change blindness results from inattention to certain visual information. They do notice when the sex and race is different. Three-part memory storage system: sensory storage, short-term storage, and long-term storage. Each of these memory stores retains different encoded input, and each has the capacity to maintain information for a certain length of time. And this is a great table that kind of goes over those things in terms of the function of storage, the encoding for storage, the duration of storage, and capacity of storage. So if you look at the sensory storage, the function, it creates a perceptual continuity for the world around us. Even when we blink, we still perceive the world as continuous. In the encoding for storage, in the sense that it's experienced, of course, so the visual, auditory, taste, smell, and touch. Duration of storage up to a few seconds, so it's really like a third of a second is really when it's just like on fire, and then after that it kind of dissipates, right? But depends on the sense. Capacity for storage is vast due to a huge amount of sensory input, so we really take in everything in the world, but it quickly dissipates, right, is what the research shows. And then the short-term storage, the function is to maintain information for immediate use, okay? So we can kind of keep that in our working memory and our working tablet while we put stuff in the long term as well. But we got something that's like, you know, with our attention is enabling us to take in that information and kind of hold it there. And how do we hold it there for about 20 seconds? It's primarily auditory, but also visual and semantic. 7 plus or minus 2 in terms of its capacity. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And if you can use working memory aids, remember that's going to increase your capacity for that, like chunking. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The function of storage for long-term storage, of course, is stores information for re-access and use at a later time. Very important, right? Primarily semantic and also visual and auditory based on meaning. So the more things that you can relate to, that make them mean, if you can make things meaningful, connect them to what you already know, transform something that's not really meaningful into something meaningful, that's best. And use visual as well as auditory, and dual coding provides richest encoding, or multiple beyond dual coding, and we'll talk about that too, using both the senses, visual, auditory, as well as semantic, boom, 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 you know, loci, make things meaningful, all kinds of stuff like that. Test yourself through free recall, my favorite, I'll go over that. And unlimited capacity and unlimited duration of storage until you burn your brain cells through college and stuff like that. Sensory input, this is a cool diagram. Sensory storage, unattended information is lost. Attention and encoding right here, so you got to pay attention to the information that's coming in right now. Information manipulated in working memory through repeating and chunking, saying it over and over, right? Otherwise, it's lost. And then through that intention and encoding and doing different processes, you're pushing it into long-term memory. Some information, again, may be forgotten. It's like the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, right? 5 types of sensory storage. Sensory storage, a memory storage system that very briefly holds vast amount of information from the 5 senses. Close to the original sensory formats. The 5 types are sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. I like to do it like that. The triple S's plus T help, easy to remember, right? So you got sight, you got sound, you got smell, you got taste, and you got touch, right? Okay, there we go. Sperling experiment really shows that sensory information, you take in everything, right? For like a third of a second, and then after that, things disappear. And the way that they proved that was participants were flashed 3 rows of letters, 4 in each row, for 1/20th of a second. Those who tried to learn all 12 of the letters could only remember 1 row. But if participants were told to choose a row depending on the tone, so they flashed it really quick, right? This thing right here, flashed it. And then right after they flashed it, they gave them a tone. And it was either a high tone, and that would say, do the top row, or medium tone, do the medium row, or low tone, do the low row. And they'd be able to remember any of the rows, right? And that's what this shows here. So basically, we take in information, and that's what this really cool sparklers show, that, you know, and you see the tracers and stuff, that sensory information is still maintaining itself, even though it's passed. Kind of like a camera, right? Duration and capacity of sensory storage. Sperling concluded from his experiment that participants maintained many of the 12 items in sensory storage for about 1/3 of a second. By maintaining a large amount of information for a fraction of a second, sensory storage enables us to experience the world as a continuous stream of information rather than discrete sensations. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about, so we just talked about sensory storage. Next one is short-term storage, working memory. Short-term storage, a memory storage system that briefly holds a limited amount of information awareness. It's limited and fleeting. Working memory is part of that. So it's like, short-term storage, working memory, they're kind of part and parcel of the same thing. One's like the storage space, right? But then working memory is like actively putting stuff into long-term memory. An active process, there it is, active, right? Processing system that allows manipulation of different types of information to keep it available for current use. Allows you to repeat a phone number, for example. And it's limited. How is it limited? I think I said 7 plus or minus 2. That's probably coming up in another slide. I was hoping to segue into that. So that's just a memory technique that I use to remember how to spell segue, a very strange way. It's not S-E-G-W-A-Y. It's segue. Duration of short-term storage. Short-term storage may be a location for maintaining information, maintaining memories. Best case for short-term storage, you will remember 8 items that last for about 20 seconds, and working memory processes allow us to actively maintain the information we want to remember. Completing the backwards counting process limits our working memory functionality. So you are given like words to remember and you have to count backwards from, 100 or 20 or whatever. And obviously that limits your ability to do that, to consolidate, push stuff from short-term memory into long-term memory. And that's the slide that shows you that. The more time you spent counting backwards, the less number of letter strings recalled correctly. Letter strings, really interesting to remember, right? Well, that's purposeful, right? Give you something that it's not easy to remember. And then, of course, only if you have some crazy memory techniques like the US Memory Champions and the World Memory Champions, then you can remember it. Like they create a system, right, for remembering numbers. So you create things that are numbers or semi-meaningless, unless you're into baseball or, sports is a little easier because, people have certain, jerseys or whatever. But that's how you basically create meaningful information out of these numbers. That's what chunking is right here. George Miller of the George Miller Band now. George Miller noted, this is Steve Miller Band, isn't it? George Miller noted the capacity of short-term storage. Famous George Miller cognitive psychologist is generally 7 items plus or minus 2, which is referred to as the memory span. There's chunking, which is using working memory to organize information into meaningful units to make it easier to remember and allow us to increase the capacity of our short-term storage. You can translate this information of having a good beer, 805, with Michael Jordan, 23, and the great one, Wayne Gretzky, and Magic Johnson, number 32, celebrating U.S. independence with George Washington, 1776. So you can transform that number into something 805-2399-32-1776. 805-2399-32-1776. Okay. I think I need some work on that. You got to practice it, right? Start to create that long-term potentiation. Practice it over and over. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Okay. Maybe that's another slide coming up. Long-term storage, near limitless capacity and duration. Information that helps us adapt to the environment survives more likely to be transformed into a memory in long-term storage, of course. Which objects are edible, which people are friends, and which are enemies, who to trust. The lie detector. Check out Lita Cosmides' research on that. Really cool. The famous evolutionary psychology professor and researcher. How to find food and get home. How to avoid danger and reproduce. So obviously that information is going to be easier to remember. Encoding for long-term storage, 2 types. Maintenance rehearsal, using working memory processes to repeat the information over and over. But it really provides only a shallow encoding of information. Much better is elaborative rehearsal, because remember, your long-term memory works on semantics, on meaning. Using working memory processes to think about how new information relates to ourselves or our prior knowledge, or if you can connect it to something funny or something that relates to survival, like sex or I don't know, survival, any type of survival, then you're going to remember it easier. And that's what Joshua Foer does, is the more that you can think of something that's really raunchy and just startling in some way, the easier it is to remember it. And so they often use those types of things, something visceral. And on Netflix, they have a really great show about that, where they talk to one of the memory champions, and she talks about that too, about creating these really fantastic images along a walkway, which is using loci. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I digress. Semantic encoding, what does it mean to you? How does it relate to what you already know? Provides deeper encoding of information for more successful long-term storage. Activates more brain regions, making more neural connections. So the idea is that you want to transform things that are meaningless into something that's really meaningful, and that's how you can transform, for example, the previous example of those numbers into something that was more meaningful, like images and interacting with people, for example. As Joshua Foer talks about, transform bakers, capital B bakers, into small b bakers. In other words, they show images where they show this guy is, and you have to remember who the people were, and they show you a bunch of images, and they show this guy is a guy named Baker, and then they show the same guy to another group of people, and they say this guy is a baker, and people are more likely to remember that guy as a baker when they're shown a picture of him later without the baker outfit. They're more likely to remember it because they associate all kinds of things with this guy who looks like a baker. Now, if they made him look like a baker, he's kind of like this Italian guy that, had like, okay, maybe I'm being a little, I don't know, stereotyping here, but he had like, a more rounder face. Looked like he enjoyed food, like my buddy said, don't trust a skinny chef. No, he's a skinny chef, so he's actually a really good chef. So I don't really think it means anything, but you got to watch out for that. That's in the next chapter, in chapter 8 on heuristics and stuff. We'll talk about that. But anyway, I digress there too as well. Make the information meaningful to you. Create associations to things you already know. Create associations that are funny, unusual, or raunchy, and if you can put them in a place too, that's even helpful, as they talk about with the loci system. If you, let's say you met someone named Rita, you really want to remember Rita's name. You can think of Rita as having salt rimmed around her hair, like a margarita. You could just repeat her name over and over, like in maintenance rehearsal, but no, do some elaborative rehearsal, right? It makes it easier. So you spend more time up front with your working memory, doing things to be creative about how you're going to make that memory stick and create a little latch to it that's pre-existing, right? And then it's going to be easier for you to find. So pretend this is your brain. This is your brain. It's not a diagram, but your brain is connections, right? So these are like, okay, strengthen those connections, right? And the more you do it, the more easier it is to do it, and the cooler it is. Like raunchy or something related to survival, or interesting, or different, or funny, or unusual, then your brain is going to cue in with your amygdala, and basically you got more brain connections working on that to create stronger connections. Okay, there's red-haired Rita, alliteration, red-haired Rita, rhyme, those types of things. People have been using that for eons, right, to remember things, because the majority of our history was what? Was it written history? No, it was oral history, right? So we had to remember these things, so we've been doing this for ages. Lovely Rita, the meter maid. Lovely Rita, meter maid. That's my Beatles. The Beatles were bigger than Jesus Christ, I tell you. No, that's a bad John Lennon, or I don't know who it was, Ringo or something like that. Some say Paul was the walrus. But you could think of Rita writing you a ticket, the meter maid. Someone named Rita. You could see cheesy powder all over her face, and imagine that when you're talking to her, and it's dough Rita. You could have her eating pita bread, Rita pita, or wrapped in a pita. You could have her wrapped nude in a pita, if you will, or dressed nude in a cheetah skin, Rita the cheetah, etc. You got it. Okay. The memory champions for numbers. This is an example. They create the PAO. That's the person, action, and object. List like the one below, but they do it for 0 to 99. So that's going to be quite a list there. 0 to 99 people. 0 to 99 actions, and 0 to 99 objects. But once you get that down, you can remember any series of numbers. Boom, they break it up into 6, and then 2s like this. this number series right here. First 2 digits become the person, second 2 digits become the action, next 2 digits become an object. So if you're trying to remember 15, 16, and 33, it's Albert Einstein lifting a cane. And Arnold Schwartz, if you're trying to remember 16, 33, and 15, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger swinging a blackboard. So pretty cool, right? And then now all of a sudden you're transforming these numbers, which are meaningless, into meaningful things. And then if you can place it along a walk that you regularly know, or like your home or something, then it's going to be easier too. Especially if they're funny. What's this chart say? That, people asked to remember lists of words, told to view the words, repeat them, or think about the meaning of the words, and which ones do you think did better? Okay, the meaning. Show me the meaning of the word. Okay, no, that's bad. Long-term storage versus short-term storage. Long-term storage lasts longer, has a far greater capacity, and depends on deep encoding of information. Deep encoding and then regularly studying it over time is going to create neural connections, and neural connections that are going to be stronger. They're going to be bound not just by neurochemical connections, but they're also going to create more connections, more receptors on the dendrites, and more dendrites to connect to other dendrites, to speak to one another. What is the primacy and recency effect? Okay, you're given a list of 20 words to remember in order, and you're given 5 minutes to do that. Okay, here they are right now. No, you can make up your list, and then you can test yourself, study them for 5 minutes, then test yourself, see if you remember them. And here's what you're going to do. You're going to remember the first part of the list. You're going to remember the last part of the list, and you're not going to remember the middle part of the list. And this is like if I was saying them out loud to you and you're trying to remember them. Okay, so why do people remember the first part of the list? Why do people remember the last part of the list? Are short-term storage and long-term storage different types of memory systems in the brain? Why do people forget the middle part of the list? Okay, so they remember the first part of the list because what? Because when you're given the list, and I'm saying it to you right now, remember blackboard and cane and Arnold Schwarzenegger. You're a little girly man because you don't lift big weights like me. Okay, so that's bad, right? But they remember the first part of the list because you're putting them in, you're like saying them over and over, right? So they're like in working memory and you're saying them over and over. And through saying them over and over, you're putting it into long-term memory and you got pretty solid storage by saying them over and over. Why do you remember the last part of the list? It's just like, when you get that test, and like half the class is writing down some answers right away because they just studied that information, and they don't want to forget it. Or, if you got some difficult formula or whatever, just write it down really quick, right? Okay, because it's still in your short-term memory, in your working memory, right? Short-term storage, okay? So that's easy to remember. First part, you put it in, you encode it in your long-term memory, easy to remember. Last part, still fresh in short-term memory. Middle part, through repeating the first part, you are getting in the way of learning the middle part. And it's not recent, so you don't remember it, and you only got 7 plus or minus 2 in that working memory, so yeah, you do the math. And that's where it reflects right there. Schemas, ways of structuring and categorizing memories and long-term storage that help us to perceive, organize, process, and use information. They're mental frameworks or ways of viewing the world, and they can get in the way of memory. Basically, we remember things through our own vision, visual, or a way of looking at the world, a way of viewing things. Association networks, Collins and Loftus, meaning of information is organized in long-term storage based on networks of associations between nodes. Each node is made up of meaningful, distinctive information. The closer the nodes are, the stronger the association. And activating one node increases the likelihood that associated nodes will also be activated. So as you can see here, the more connections that you create, just like in the slide, the diagram I showed you of Rita, the easier it's going to be to get to the thing that you're trying to remember, Rita. Because you're like, Rita, what the heck? Remember something about a meter maid. Remember something about cheesy powder all over her face. I remember salt rimmed around. Why the heck? Cheesy powder, salt rimmed around. Okay, that should get you there, right? Rita, why the heck did I remember all this stuff? But maybe not. Spreading activation models of memory activating one node. Is that the same thing? Increases the likelihood that closely linked nodes will become active. You'll more quickly identify an ambulance. It is the same one. Kind of. Same thing. Okay, move on. HM had retrograde amnesia and anterograde amnesia. ML, which one does he have? Retrograde amnesia, a condition in which people lose the ability to access memories they had before the brain injury. And anterior amnesia, a condition in which people lose the ability to form new memories after experiencing a brain injury, kind of like Memento. I think he had trouble with the new memories. Trippy movie, right? Underside of the brain there, this is your brain. Where does consciousness exist in that? Somewhere outside floating around? No, in the brain. Okay, long-term storage, explicit memory and implicit memory. In terms of explicit memory, it requires conscious effort and often can be verbally described. You can break it down into episodic memory and semantic memory. Episodic memory, those are your episodes in your life, right? Personally experienced events. And semantic memory, facts and knowledge, like, what college do you go to, and, what subjects do they have there, and stuff like that. And the tomato's a fruit, not a vegetable. Really? All right, what is up with that? Okay, implicit memory does not require conscious effort and often cannot be verbally described. And the two areas of that are classical conditioning and procedural memory. Procedural memory has to do with just your motor skills and habits that you learn and then you can unconsciously kick down. You don't even have to think about them, like riding a bike, right? And then classical conditioning, remember, that's how fear responses are learned, stuff through the amygdala. It's associating two stimuli that elicit a response. And these are often unconscious. Explicit memory, the system for long-term storage of conscious memories that can be verbally described, also known as declarative memory. It can be declared, right, explicitly. You can declare it in words or facts. There are episodes and semantic memories. HM could not form new explicit memories. Episodic memory, type of explicit memory, includes personal experiences. Semantic includes knowledge about the world. I know it's just a little redundant here. Brain damage cases where patients lose episodic or semantic memory shows that there are different types of explicit memories. Also, there are different types of implicit memories, the system for long-term storage of unconscious memories that cannot be verbally described, also known as non-declarative memory. You can't declare it, right, in words. Advertisers take advantage of this memory. Mere exposure effect, for example, familiarity principle, or jingles, for example. You're like, why the heck do I still have this song in my head? And they created this little jingle to make you sing about some song all day, and then you unconsciously want to buy the product or something like that. I don't know. Pete Ellis Dodge, Long Beach Freeway, Firestone exit Southgate. It's like, if you're looking for a better set of wheels, I will stand upon my head to do all deals. You probably don't know these things, but these are from my childhood. They stay in my head. I can't get rid of them now. Maybe I could do that sort of reconsolidate the memories and get rid of them somehow, but I don't know, they're kind of cool. He will stand upon his head till his ears are turning red. Go see Cal, go see Cal, go see Cal. Cal Worthington and his dog Spot. Anyway, two types, motor skill memory and memories learned through classical conditioning. HM could form new implicit memories, though, and they did that through the mirror task, where he had to trace a star looking at a mirror. Sounds like a really big pain in the butt. Guys sounded really patient by going through a lot of their research. Classical conditioning employs implicit memory, procedural memory, also a type of implicit memory. And important, too, because we don't have full conscious. Our conscious is like the small part of our whole brain, right? We wouldn't be able to do things and be effective in the world if we didn't have this type of implicit memory, right? You can't be thinking about the bike, and like while doing it and stuff and do it effectively. Prospective memory, remembering to do something at a future time. I can't remember what was I supposed to do? This is one for me that's like, okay, really? Maybe that's why I have the vitamins, Did I take my vitamins today and stuff? And why I have a planner so I can write my goals and stuff and a checklist and stuff and keep myself on track. Remembering to do something takes up valuable cognitive resources, affects encoding and working memory. Therefore, that's why I was talking about the planner. That's why you use a planner. If you got to stress about like what you got upcoming, guess what? It's going to take up your resources that you need for studying and doing well on the exam. So why not just write it in a planner? It's like a de-stressor too. I got this in my planner and my checklist. Got it planned out. I'm gonna do it. And then do it, of course, because if you don't follow the planner, that's like boy cried wolf kind of thing, right? So you don't want to do that. Memory's physical location. Not all brain areas are equally involved in memory. A great deal of specialization occurs. Temporal lobes, new explicit memories, but not new implicit memories. Implicit memories tend to be located in the cerebellum. Procedural memories for learning motor actions, and the amygdala, fear objects that signal danger. Danger, Will Robinson. Memory does not live in one part of the brain, but multiple parts. Check it out, the prefrontal cortex, working memory. Temporal lobe, explicit memory. Amygdala, implicit memory. Cerebellum, implicit memory. Amygdala for fear learning, implicit memory for procedural memory. Cerebellum, and the hippocampus, spatial memory. Enlarged hippocampus, more spatial memory. Consolidation, a process by which immediate memories become lasting through long-term storage. Synapses become stronger, new synapses are formed. That's the Hebbian principle, right? And more receptors within, on the dendrites, and more dendrites. Medial temporal lobes are responsible for coordinating the storage of information between the different cortical sites and strengthening the connections among neurons. So think your medial temporal lobes, if you're doing awesome in school right now, strengthening all those connections, right, between multiple areas of the brain. Have you learned that? So we've got multiple senses. We've got multiple ways of encoding, mainly through visual and auditory and meaning, right? But you can do all these other things too, space, for example, and different things. The multiple modes of learning that you engage in, for example, the loci using space and unusual associative learning, those combinations, for example, studying, regularly over a period of time, studying and sleeping, right? It's like drink water, eat, sleep, study, sleep, drink water, eat, study, sleep, chop wood, something like that, gather water. Helps form new explicit memories. Natural storage occurs in particular brain regions engaged during the perception, processing, and analysis of the material being learned. So you use multiple senses. Hear it, see it, do it, right? Teach it. Boom, booyah. Love teaching it, right? You're involving all those different modes of learning. Especially you have to make sense of it to be able to teach it to someone. So then you got to really know it. Otherwise you look like a fool in front of the video. Okay. Sleep helps consolidation of memories, and disturbing sleep interferes with it. So, oh yeah, you got to get your sleep, right? Joy to the nappers, like that one study where you do like studied list of words, and one group had to go like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and do that over 30 minutes. The other group just chilled, and the other group took a nap. Who did better on the memory recall test? Joy to the nappers. This one shows that your brain region is active during the perception of pictures, and then when you're thinking about those pictures, remembering same areas of the brain. Boom. What does that say? Your senses, right? Taking in different information and then thinking about it. So the multiple senses that you can use and multiple modes of memory, associative learning, that type of stuff. It's muy bueno, right? Reconsolidation of memories. Once memories are activated, they need to be consolidated again for long-term storage. This process is known as reconsolidation, or use it or you lose it, right? Retrieved memories can be affected by new circumstances, so reconsolidated memories may differ from their original versions. And then so memory is a recreation, yes. And then depending on the questions you're asked, for example, how you're asked the questions, like Loftus talked about or found, it can influence your memories. Can we erase negative memories? Check out this study on that. The idea is, yes, you can. If it's reconsolidation, you get in the way of the reconsolidation. You do that by blocking the effects of serotonin on these 5 HT2C receptors. Retrieval cues help us access our memories. Retrieval cues, anything that a person can access information, or person access information in long-term storage. Anything that helps a person access information in long-term storage. How is that so hard? I must have not had my retrieval cue. And they talk about context and state aid retrieval. context-dependent memory effect, and state-dependent memory. And the context, if you study underwater and versus study above water, and then you both test below water, who does better? The people who studied underwater. And also, like, if you study under a certain mood, you're going to be influenced if you have that same mood later, or if you have a different mood, that's going to influence too. It's really hard to remember, for example, happy times when you're sad and vice versa. Mnemonics Aid Retrieval. This is the PEG system here, but you can also use acronyms, NASA, CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, acrostics. Acronyms, PEMDAS, acrostics. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, making a sentence with the first letters indicating the operations in a math. Do the parentheses, and then excuse exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, PEMDAS. And loci, where you're remembering things using association, as well as walking through, like I talked about, somewhere where you know, and placing those objects like that are not just the object itself, but some type of associative thing that makes it funny or raunchy or whatever. And you're remembering those things along the walkway. So it's utilizing space information and meaning and unusual information, amygdala, all kinds of things, right? Awesome.